In a world where the boundaries between politics, media, and the judiciary are increasingly blurred, few moments capture the tension better than a live televised confrontation. Judge Amy Coney Barrett, known for her quiet confidence and sharp, legal mind, stepped onto Stephen Colbert's late-night show expecting a thoughtful discussion. Instead, what unfolded was a high-stakes clash filled with biting critiques, raw emotions, and a battle for public perception. How does a Supreme Court judge respond when confronted with relentless skepticism from one of television's most incisive commentators? What happens when the ideals of justice meet the harsh spotlight of public scrutiny? This story peels back the curtain on that unforgettable night, exploring every charged exchange, every calculated response, and the surprising conclusion that left audiences around the nation stunned. It is a tale of confrontation, resilience, and the struggle to uphold principles in an age of polarized opinion. Make sure to like and subscribe for more stories that dive deep into moments shaping our society. The stage was set in the iconic studio, lights glowing warmly but sharply on the figures seated across from each other. Judge Amy Coney Barrett, composed and poised, faced Stephen Colbert, whose reputation for mixing sharp wit with pointed criticism preceded him. The audience sat quietly, sensing that this was no ordinary interview. It was a collision of worlds, where judicial gravity met late-night satire and scrutiny. Colbert opened with his trademark blend of humor and provocation, but quickly shifted gears. Judge Barrett, many Americans are asking, how do you reconcile the enormous power you hold in shaping law with the widespread perception that the Supreme Court has become deeply politicized? His voice was calm but carried an undercurrent of challenge. Barrett's response was measured. She spoke about the judiciary's role as an impartial interpreter of the Constitution, emphasizing the importance of judicial restraint and adherence to legal text over political ideology. Yet, even in her calm delivery, there was a recognition of the stakes at hand. Was the public's trust in the judiciary truly intact? Could the principles she upheld withstand the fierce scrutiny not only of critics, but of millions watching from their living rooms? The conversation quickly intensified. Colbert pressed on, questioning specific rulings and their implications on civil rights, healthcare, and voting laws. Is it possible, he asked pointedly, that some decisions reflect more than legal interpretation? That they are political acts in disguise? The audience shifted, sensing the tension deepen. Barrett defended her record with quiet confidence, pointing to precedent and the long-standing traditions of the court. Yet, the underlying question hung in the air. When the court's decisions repeatedly align with one political spectrum, can it truly claim impartiality? Or is it inevitably drawn into the political fray? Throughout this exchange, Barrett maintained a careful balance, answering each question without losing composure. But with every probing remark, the pressure mounted. The dialogue was no longer just about law or politics. It was about legitimacy, trust, and the future of the nation's highest court. Colbert's tone grew sharper. When people lose faith in impartial justice, what does that mean for the very idea of democracy? This was no longer just an interview. It was a confrontation that exposed the fractures beneath the surface of American society. Barrett's next words would either soothe the growing divide or deepen it. The room seemed to hold its breath. How would she respond? As the studio lights cast sharp shadows across the set, Amy Coney Barrett's gaze never wavered. Her poised demeanor belied the weight of the moment. This was not simply an interview, but a test of her judicial philosophy under the unforgiving glare of public scrutiny. The questions were no longer mere inquiries. They were challenges aimed at the very legitimacy of the Supreme Court itself. Colbert's voice, steady yet edged with skepticism, cut through the silence. Judge Barrett, the nation watches not just your words, but your record. How do you reconcile your rulings with the growing belief that the court is a political tool rather than a neutral arbiter? When cases involving healthcare, voting rights, or civil liberties seem to fall predictably along partisan lines, how can the public maintain faith in impartial justice? The question hung in the air like a guillotine's blade. Barrett's response was deliberate, her tone carefully calibrated. The judiciary is designed to be insulated from political winds. Our duty is to interpret the Constitution and laws passed by the legislature, not to legislate from the bench. Each decision rests on legal precedent and the text before us, not on personal or political beliefs. Her voice remained steady, but beneath the surface was a tension that reflected the broader national anxiety. Was the judiciary still the impartial bastion it claimed to be? Or had the flames of political division consumed even this last refuge? Colbert pressed on, undeterred. But Judge, when public perception shifts so dramatically, when trust erodes, does it matter what the court says it does? If the American people believe the court is partisan, how can it command respect or compliance with its rulings? Isn't perception reality in this case? His words were more than pointed. They were a direct indictment of the court's standing in contemporary society. Barrett, unfazed, leaned into her role as defender of judicial integrity. Respect for the rule of law must be earned through consistent application of legal principles, not swayed by public opinion. Our role is to ensure laws are applied fairly, without regard to political outcomes. The moment we abandon that, we risk undermining the foundation of democracy itself. Her declaration resonated beyond the stage, echoing in living rooms across the country. Yet as the back and forth intensified, the underlying questions deepened. Could the court maintain this ideal when its decisions had real, tangible impacts on millions? When rulings affected voting rights, healthcare access, and civil liberties, could they ever be perceived as apolitical? And what of the voices crying out, demanding transparency and accountability in a judiciary increasingly seen as opaque and unaccountable? Colbert's demeanor shifted, his sarcasm giving way to a sharper edge. When people feel unheard, when their rights seem vulnerable, does the court's independence protect them or leave them exposed? How do you answer those who say the court's rulings silence voices rather than uphold justice? The tension in the room was palpable. Barrett took a moment, gathering her thoughts before responding. Justice requires courage and clarity, especially when decisions are unpopular. Our responsibility is not to placate public opinion, but to uphold the Constitution in its purest form. The rule of law is the safeguard against tyranny, regardless of whose interests are favored in any given case. The exchange had evolved into more than a discussion. It was a microcosm of a nation wrestling with faith in its institutions. The dialogue laid bare the fractures between legal ideals and political realities, between public trust and judicial authority. Colbert's probing questions challenged Barrett's carefully constructed narrative, pushing her to defend not just rulings, but the legitimacy of the court itself. As the segment approached its midpoint, Barrett's resilience was clear, but so too was the challenge ahead. Could she convince a skeptical audience that the court was above politics? Or was this confrontation a sign that the institution she represented was under siege like never before? The studio fell into a brief silence, anticipation hanging thick. Barrett's next words would either reinforce her steadfast image or reveal cracks beneath the judicial armor. The atmosphere in the studio thickened as Barrett prepared to address the mounting skepticism head-on. She knew that beyond Colbert's pointed questions, the eyes of the nation were watching, hungry for answers to a deeper, more troubling question. Was the Supreme Court still a guardian of justice, or had it become just another arena for political warfare? Barrett's voice was steady but carried an unmistakable firmness as she began. I understand the concerns many have about the court's role and the perception of bias. But history shows that judicial independence is a cornerstone of democracy. Judges are tasked with applying the law, regardless of popularity or political pressure. This is not about ideology, it is about fidelity to the Constitution. Yet even as she spoke, The fissures in public confidence were evident. Colbert leaned forward, his tone measured but relentless. "Judge, the Constitution is a living document, subject to interpretation, yes, but isn't the way it is interpreted inevitably influenced by personal beliefs? How do we separate that from politics when you have judges appointed by presidents of one party or the other, often selected for their ideological leanings?" Barrett met his gaze squarely. "While judges come from diverse backgrounds, our oath is to uphold the law impartially. The legitimacy of the court depends on that commitment. Otherwise, we risk descending into chaos, where laws are bent to suit whoever holds power." Her words evoked the fragility of democracy itself, a delicate balance maintained by the faith in institutions. The exchange shifted to a poignant moment when Colbert asked, "But Judge, how do you respond to those who feel that their voices are being silenced, that court decisions are stripping away rights, voting, healthcare, equality, and that the court is complicit in those losses?" The question was not rhetorical. It cut deep into the moral fabric of the conversation. Barrett's response was layered with a mixture of legal rigor and an undercurrent of empathy. The court's role is not to create policy but to ensure laws align with the Constitution. Sometimes that means difficult decisions that don't satisfy everyone. But justice is not a popularity contest. It is the steadfast application of law and principle. The dialogue resonated beyond the studio walls, touching on the nation's polarized reality. Viewers could sense the widening gulf between legal theory and lived experience. Was it possible to maintain respect for a court that was increasingly viewed as partisan? And if the court's decisions were viewed through a political lens, what impact would that have on its authority? Barrett's calm composure was a stark contrast to the undercurrent of tension. Behind the scenes, producers anticipated the moment when the conversation would shift from abstract principles to personal conviction, when Barrett's true beliefs and strategies for navigating this crisis of confidence would be revealed. As the discussion progressed, Barrett began to share anecdotes from her years on the bench, emphasizing moments when she had ruled against popular opinion because the law demanded it. "Those are the moments that test a judge's resolve," she explained, her voice tinged with quiet conviction. "It is easy to rule with the crowd. It is much harder to stand alone, guided only by the Constitution." Colbert nodded slowly, acknowledging the weight of her words, but still pressing for clarity. "So, Judge, do you believe the court can rebuild trust with the American people? Or has the damage been done?" The question lingered like a shadow over the set. Barrett's answer would shape not only public perception, but the fragile future of the institution she represented. Rebuilding trust requires transparency, consistency, and above all, fidelity to the law. That is the only way forward if we are to preserve the integrity of our judicial system. As the segment drew to a close, the confrontation had escalated from a debate about rulings to a profound reflection on the meaning of justice in a divided nation. Barrett's steadfastness offered reassurance to some, while others saw it as a refusal to acknowledge uncomfortable truths. The camera zoomed in on Barrett's composed expression, the silent question hanging: could the Supreme Court withstand the storm of political distrust, or was it entering an era where its very survival depended on more than legal arguments? The intensity in the studio did not wane as the conversation transitioned into more personal territory. Stephen Colbert's tone softened slightly, yet remained charged with the urgency of the issues at hand. He shifted focus to the impact of Barrett's decisions on everyday Americans, on communities feeling marginalized and unheard. "Judge Barrett," he began, "beyond the legal principles and the abstract notions of the Constitution, there are people, millions of them, whose lives are directly shaped by your rulings. They ask, how can justice feel impartial when it seems stacked against them? How do you reconcile the human cost when decisions affect access to health care, voting rights, and equal protection under the law? For a brief moment, Barrett's unyielding poise faltered. She took a deep breath, acknowledging the weight of responsibility resting on her shoulders. "It is a burden I do not take lightly," she said. "Every case represents real lives, real consequences. But the role of the court is to interpret the law, not to make it. That is the legislature's job. We apply the law as it is written, even when the outcomes are difficult." Colbert leaned in, the tension palpable. "But when the law itself is flawed or outdated, doesn't the court have a duty to protect the vulnerable? Should judges not be guardians of justice in a broader sense, beyond mere technicalities?" Barrett's reply was measured but firm. "Our duty is to uphold the Constitution, the framework within which laws operate. Changing laws is the responsibility of elected representatives. Judicial activism undermines the separation of powers and risks turning judges into legislators. That is not the role of the judiciary." The exchange laid bare the fault lines between judicial restraint and activism, a debate central to the court's role in a polarized political landscape. The audience could feel the mounting frustration and the deep divide between legal philosophy and the urgent calls for social justice. Colbert then presented a more pointed challenge, invoking recent high-profile cases that had drawn national outrage. "Judge, many feel that the court's rulings have rolled back protections for minorities, women, and the disadvantaged. How do you address the cries that the court is out of touch with the evolving values of society?" Barrett's response was thoughtful yet resolute. "The Constitution is the enduring foundation of our nation. While society evolves, our duty is to interpret the law as it stands, not as we wish it to be. Change comes through the democratic process, through debate and legislation, not through judicial decree." The studio audience was silent, caught between admiration for Barrett's steadfastness and unease with the implications of her stance. The conversation was no longer abstract. It was a reflection of a nation grappling with identity, justice, and the balance of power. As the dialogue reached this critical point, Barrett offered a personal reflection. "I became a judge because I believe in the rule of law. It is what protects all of us, even those whose views differ from mine. Upholding the Constitution means protecting the rights and freedoms of every American, regardless of popular opinion." Colbert nodded, acknowledging the gravity of her words. "But Judge Barrett, if the public's faith in the court continues to erode, what hope is there for that ideal? How do we rebuild trust when so many feel excluded?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unresolved. Barrett's final words were a call to perseverance and principle. "Trust is earned through integrity, consistency, and respect for the law. It is a continuous process that requires all of us, judges, lawmakers, and citizens, to engage with respect and commitment." The segment ended on a note of cautious optimism, but the tension remained, a reminder that the battle over the court's role was far from over. Barrett's unwavering stance both reassured her supporters and galvanized her critics, setting the stage for the ongoing struggle over the future of American justice. As the final moments of the interview unfolded, the atmosphere was thick with a blend of resolve and uncertainty. Judge Amy Coney Barrett's composed demeanor contrasted sharply with the storm of controversy swirling outside the studio. She had faced harsh criticism, probing questions, and moments that tested her resolve, yet she remained unshaken. Colbert leaned back, his expression a mix of respect and lingering doubt. "Judge Barrett, this conversation has been revealing, if not challenging. You stand as a symbol of the court's ideals, but also as a focal point for its critics. What do you want the American people to take away from today's dialogue?" Barrett's eyes held a quiet intensity as she replied, "I want people to understand that the judiciary is a critical pillar of democracy, designed to function independently of political winds. Our decisions are guided by the Constitution, not by popularity or partisan agendas. I hope this conversation sheds light on the complexities we face and the importance of maintaining the rule of law. The exchange resonated beyond the immediate audience, echoing across social media, news outlets, and conversations nationwide. It sparked fierce debate. Some applauded Barrett's steadfast dedication to judicial principles, while others decried what they saw as an unyielding defense of a court increasingly divorced from the public will. Yet, amidst the polarized reactions, one thing was clear. The confrontation had illuminated a critical fault line in American democracy. The Supreme Court, once perceived as an impartial arbiter, was now at the center of political and cultural battles that threatened its very legitimacy. Barrett's parting words underscored the gravity of the moment. In these divisive times, the court's role as an impartial interpreter of the law is more important than ever. It is a heavy responsibility, and one that I do not take lightly. The future of our democracy depends on our collective commitment to justice, fairness, and the enduring principles enshrined in our Constitution. As the cameras cut away and the studio lights dimmed, the story was far from over. Barrett's steadfastness in the face of intense scrutiny offered a measure of reassurance to some, but also fueled ongoing debates about the judiciary's place in a rapidly changing society. The nation was left to ponder: could the Supreme Court reclaim its role as a unifying force, or was it destined to remain a battleground for ideological conflict, its authority questioned, its decisions contested? For viewers, the interview was more than a televised confrontation. It was a moment of reckoning, a vivid illustration of the challenges facing American justice and democracy in the 21st century.